Now, what has President Trump said exactly? President Trump has essentially said that India will have to pay a 25% tariff starting the 1st of August. That's not all, because the tariffs were expected. We were already factoring in the possibility of a tariff imposition because there is no deal that has been done between India and the US despite 5 rounds of negotiations. What has come as a shock is the fact that President Trump is now suggesting there will be a tariff and then there will be a penalty. Here's why he's saying there will be a penalty. He's saying China and India do business with Russia, and so there will be a penalty imposed on China and India for buying defense equipment and buying energy from Russia. What President Trump has not said is what that penalty amount is going to be. So we have no clarity come the 1st of August what Indian exporters are going to be faced with. Will it be 25% plus the 10% baseline tariff that President Trump has already spoken about? Or what will the penalty amount be? We don't know. So that is one big question mark. Now, the other aspect, where does this leave negotiations between both sides? Remember, as I pointed out, we've had 5 rounds of negotiations. The Indian team has been going to Washington, D.C. and back to talk with the US administration about working out a mini deal. And of course, the full trade deal was expected to happen in October. Now, the expectation was that in August, around the middle of August, the 6th round of negotiations would take place and the US team would come to India to negotiate further. Where does this leave now the talks? Where does this leave the negotiations? That's question number 2. We don't know. Question number 3. What does President Trump want? Look, when he talks about not doing energy business with Russia, well, he's made that clear in the past as well. And what has India been doing? India has actually been upping its imports of US energy. So we have been importing more from the US. In fact, in just the last 6 months, we've seen a significant increase of India buying energy from the US. So we've been doing less with Russia and we've been significantly upping our engagement with the US as far as energy is concerned. So what's the end game here, since India was already willing to buy from the US? That's the next big question. Now, as far as defense is concerned, again, India has made it clear, and both sides have been engaging with each other, that India will look at more defense collaboration, deeper defense collaboration. India will look at buying more defense equipment from the US. So again, that was the stated intent expressed by India, and both sides have been talking about this. So by now suggesting that there's going to be a penalty imposed on India for doing business with Russia, you know, it leaves a larger question that what are we talking about in terms of this so-called strategic partnership, the strategic alliance between the 2 largest democracies of the world, India and the United States. We have been natural allies. We've been long-standing partners. Where does this really leave the larger strategic relationship? Forget the economic relationship for a moment. Now, we've been speaking with a whole host of experts. We've spoken with former diplomats, people like Kanwal Sibal. We've spoken with the former commerce secretaries, people like Anup Madhavan, India's envoys to the WTO, people like Anjali Prasad, industry leaders, export organizations like FIO, to really understand what they make of this development and, more importantly, what the next steps should be. How should New Delhi react to President Trump? So here's a summation of the commentary that's coming in that I'd like to present to you. First of all, what we've heard from just about everybody is that this unilateral manner in which President Trump has decided to impose tariffs and is threatening to impose penalties is illegal, because remember, both India and the US are part of the WTO. President Trump might not care about the WTO, but the fact remains that neither has the US pulled out of the WTO, and India is very much engaged with the WTO. So we are part of a multilateral trading system, and so this unilateral imposition of tariffs, in the words of Anjali Prasad and Anup Madhavan, the former Commerce Secretary, is illegal. In fact, Anjali Prasad, the former envoy to the WTO, said what President Trump is doing today amounts to almost trade anarchy. That's the term that she used. Now, forget what happens as far as the WTO is concerned. The question is whether India will, in fact, take this matter to the WTO. The other question to be asked at this point in time is, should India sit still pause, let things settle, or should India retaliate or respond in some fashion? Remember, this is President Trump that we're dealing with. Volatile man does what he feels like. And so any response from India, in the words of our experts, will also be seen as a provocation. But the view was that India must respond. And there's a difference between react and respond. India must think through what it wishes to say, what it wishes to put on the table now in light of what President Trump has decided to do. It could, of course, be to take this matter to the WTO. It could be retaliatory measures of our own, especially as far as the services sector is concerned. But, at this point in time, I would believe that we're likely to see somewhat of a pause before India decides on its next course of action. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because we don't know. We have had no comment yet from the government. We have had no comment from the Commerce Ministry, from the Ministry of External Affairs. So we don't know what India's position is at this point in time on the back of the development that has taken place today. Where does this leave industry? It leaves industry in a very uncertain time. Remember, this is a period where we're talking about how India has shipped more than any other country in the world smartphones into the United States. This was being seen as the big opportunity that as the US decided to cut its exposure and its dependence on China, that countries like India would in fact fill the gap, would in fact fill the vacuum. We saw that happen as far as the iPhone shipments to the US are concerned. Remember, that was something that China was dominating, and suddenly we saw India emerge and fill that gap, fill that vacuum. Where does all of this now leave things like exports? And there's a whole host of sectors. While it's still much smaller in comparison to the kind of overarching trade ambition that both sides have talked about, but nevertheless, uncertainty leaves people in a state of limbo because people don't know what to factor in as far as pricing is concerned. Should they factor in a 25% tariff? Should they factor in a 36% tariff? And what is this penalty that President Trump has suddenly decided to throw at India at this point in time? Nobody has an answer. So we will have to wait to see whether this is just a negotiating tactic or whether we will actually see a penalty amount being imposed. So there is trepidation, there's nervousness, and there's uncertainty as far as Indian exporters are concerned on what happens. And look, we're talking about the 1st of August. It's not far away. It's round the corner. So, we were already hearing from exporters that, there was a pause in terms of contracts and so on and so forth. So what happens now is the question. Perhaps overnight, we'll get to hear more details from the US administration on what this penalty amount is going to be. The other view that has emerged from the experts that we've been speaking to is that India must show a leadership position, must reach out to other trading partners and try and bring other trading partners together to say, look, we cannot be strong-armed into accepting deals like this. But the fact of the matter is that we've seen the EU do a deal with the US, we've seen the UK do a deal with the US, we've seen Vietnam do a deal with the US, and even China, the most significant adversary that the US classifies as an adversary, is also talking to the Trump administration, and they've got a 90-day reprieve, most likely, another reprieve, most likely, as far as the tariffs are concerned. So where does this really leave our negotiating ability with other trading partners to try and get the US to see things differently? At this point in time, it looks unlikely that there is going to be any consolidation of sorts behind India to try and take this forward. So at the end of the day, what we're talking about now is a damaged relationship. Remember, the Indian diaspora is not just large in number, it's large in influence in the US. The Indian origin CEOs run some of the largest tech companies in the US, from Microsoft to Google to Adobe, today even consumer giants like P&G, all Indian origin CEOs. So there is a large historic connection between India and the US. And by the way, it is a relationship that enjoys bipartisan support. It's a relationship that's been nurtured equally by the Democrats and the Republicans. And I would dare say that many in India believe that Republicans have been more forthcoming in their engagement with India. So at this point in time, to quote Kaval Sibal, the former diplomat, what President Trump has done, and if they follow through with this in the manner in which he has tweeted today, well, that could, in his words, wreck the relationship. And that would be not just disappointing, but it would also be dangerous. It would also be dangerous because it changes once again the power balance as far as this region is concerned. So one will have to wait to see what the end game is. Are we going to see perhaps a change, a review, a U-turn? It's happened previously. We don't know if that's going to happen this time around or not. But it's all up in the air. What we know today, for a fact, and not a certainty, for a fact is that there is a 25% imposition that President Trump has now said will come into effect from the 1st of August. What is not certain is whether that will in fact be the case, whether that penalty will finally come in or not. So we will have to wait to see how the Indian government chooses to respond to this, and whether there can be a rapprochement of sorts between both sides. There can be room for negotiations and dialogue. And again, some of our experts were pointing out this is all happening in public. President Trump is putting all of this out on social media. That leaves very little room for diplomacy to operate, because these are battles that are now being waged by one side unilaterally on public platforms, open for everybody to have a view and an opinion on. So it does constrain diplomacy. We also have Parliament in session, so that is also going to be something that the government will have to weigh as it chooses to respond to this development. But this is, of course, a big story. It is the story of the evening, and it is a story that's not done by any means just yet. There will be many implications. There will, of course, be more developments along the way, as I pointed out. Just yesterday, for instance, we heard from Scott Bessent, from the Treasury Secretary. We heard from Howard Lutnick, and they were still talking about the fact that negotiations are on, but they did say that the decision was with President Trump. So the indications are that while the US negotiating team was perhaps okay with the contours of the agreement that had been kind of thrashed out between both sides, they did make it clear that the final decision would be President Trump's. And as of today, President Trump has said tariffs, he said penalty. Tariffs, we know 25%. Penalty, we don't know just yet. So we will need clarity. We will need to see the fine print on the exact implications for Indian exports. And of course, we will have to wait to see what the response will be. But we will keep you posted. All you need to do is tune into CNBC-TV18. We'll, of course, also get you the market reactions. Today, we saw a big move, not for the markets, but we saw a big move in the currency market with the rupee. So all of this will also react tomorrow when the markets open for trade. So remember to tune into CNBC-TV18. We'll get you the best voices, the most credible opinion, and the most influential views and insights. So tune into us bright and early, and of course through the course of the night today, as well as we get more and more details coming in from the US. For now, thanks very much for joining us on our YouTube channel. For more news and updates, all you need to do is follow CNBC-TV18 on all of our digital platforms.